This is Lecture 1. This is Lecture 1. It's just an introduction to the course, and these lectures themselves are really intended to supplement the material that's available through the class, through the website, and through the individual readings themselves. Welcome to my Introduction to Ethics course. Typically, I will go over my syllabus and the schedule on the first day of class, but since that stuff is all available on the course website, I will go ahead and forsake that part of this lecture. Instead, we'll just focus on ethics in general and some of the subcategories of ethics. Well, first off, I'd like to talk about some of the divisions within ethics itself. There's sort of three subcategories in the field of ethics, right? When we're looking at value theory, theory of values, that might be a general definition of ethics. It's typically divided into sort of these three subcategories, okay? The first one I want to talk about would be normative ethics. After that, we have practical or applied ethics. And last but not least is meta ethics. So, normative ethics. Normative ethics examines the standards of rightness or wrongness of an act. So, we'll be doing a lot of this. Questions that we might ask when we're doing normative ethics are, what should one do? What should one base one's actions on? Right? A good way to remember normative ethics is that it sets the norms, right? What are the standards for right and wrong, right? What should these be? When we're answering questions like this, we're doing normative ethics. Okay, after that, we have practical or applied ethics. This is where we examine how our ethical theories should be applied to practical cases, right? You might ask, should abortion be legal, right? That's a very particular case, right? Is euthanasia moral, right? Euthanasia, or mercy killing, as some people refer to it. Is this an ethical action, right? You're taking a particular action and you're applying the norms to it. Metaethics, last but not least, examines the nature of ethics and ethical language, right? Ethical claims that we make. So metaethics steps outside of normative ethics and determines the nature of ethics and ethical language. It asks questions like, are there objective moral truths, right? This would be an ethical, a meta-ethical question, right? Is morality just a matter of opinion? That's a sort of meta-ethical question. So again, normative ethics examine the standards of rightness and wrongness. Practical and applied ethics examine how those ethical theories should be applied to particular cases, right? That's why they're practical or applied. They're applied to a practical case in practice. And metaethics examines the nature of ethics or ethical language. So a meta-ethical question, one that I posed there earlier, was, is morality just a matter of opinion? A meta-ethical question. Well, is it? Do you think that morality is just a matter of opinion? That it's just dependent on an individual, or perhaps it's depends on the culture of the individual? Well, if you answered yes to that, then you're going to find yourself in disagreement with the vast majority of the thinkers, which we will be covering in this course. The position that you're agreeing to is known as relativism, right? The idea that ethics is relative, that there are no objective ethical values, that it's dependent upon the subject. That would be subjectivism, right? Each individual person, each subject determines their ethical values, right, on an individual basis, right? That's kind of an extreme form of relativism, subjectivism. And besides that, you also have the idea of cultural relativism, another form of relativism, the idea that moral values are determined by the culture that you were raised in. Okay, so this would be cultural relativism. Okay, so are you agreeing to this? If you think ethics are just a matter of opinion, you're agreeing to relativism. And a lot of people, I think, on sort of a basic every day-to-day level of understanding, sort of subscribe to this view, right? We see a world of people with different values and they disagree. And they think relativism, well, this is obviously true. Well, is that a good way to go about the study of ethics? If it is, then perhaps this course is just a waste of time. If there's no field of ethics to study and it's all just a matter of opinion, then there's no real science here, and you ought to just get your money back for the course and forget about this. But I hope that you don't do that because, again, there's a lot of thinkers who believe that it isn't quite as clear as that. But why would you believe this? Why would you believe that ethics are a matter of opinion? Well, it's pretty easy to do when you look around the world around you, isn't it? Everybody in different cultures, especially, they might believe completely different things than you and have a completely different value system than you, who were raised in a completely different culture. So one might see how cultural relativism is true, right? Also, the idea that ethical statements, ethical commands such as "thou shalt not kill," these seem, if they are true, they don't seem to be true in the same sense that 2 + 2 = 4 is true, right? They don't seem true in a way that can be proven the way that mathematical statements can be proven, and the way that some scientific statements might be proven. So it's easy to see where this idea of morality is just a matter of opinion. It's easy to see where this comes from. But ask yourself this, right? If you believe that morality is just a matter of opinion and it just doesn't matter at all, right? You want to say that it just depends on the culture or the person, for that matter, if you're a subjectivist or a cultural relativist. If you really believe that, right, ask yourself this. Well, do you think slavery is justifiable? Right? Do you think that slavery is permissible? Right? Do you think that it's okay to own a slave and to exploit a human being like that? Well, if you answered no to that question, then it's sort of, well, it's inconsistent, right? If you want to say that a certain thing is bad and yet morality is just a matter of opinion, well, and of course you're going to say, well, it's just my opinion that slavery is bad. Okay, well, what about this? What about torturing babies for fun? If somebody said, I like torturing babies for fun, you don't think that would be moral, do you? Well, I hope not. And let's see how far you can get with your cultural or your subjectivism, your cultural relativism or your subjectivism, right? Because if I want to tell you I like torturing small babies for fun and you tell me, well, I don't think that's right and I'm going to stop you, well, what right do you have to stop me? If morality is just a matter of opinion, I might say, well, it's just my opinion that it's okay to torture small babies. You might be able to stop me, but you won't be able to argue against me. And that's what we're going to be doing in this course, right? We're not just going to be talking about our opinion, right? Which I invite your opinion, and I encourage you to express your opinion through the online forums or directly through to me. But if you want to express your opinion and you don't agree with some of the things that you're reading here or that are being said, you can't just disagree, right? That's one of the things about taking a course in philosophy, is that I expect you to do a little bit of critical thinking here, right? And so if somebody comes up to you and tells you, I like to torture small babies for fun, and you say, well, it's just my opinion and that's wrong, that's not enough. I mean, that might be enough for me to justify you stopping this heinous baby killer, but it's not enough for you to win an A in the course. To win an A in the course, I want you to tell me why. Why is it wrong to torture babies for fun, right? Why is it wrong to keep somebody as a slave and exploit them, right? And if you can come up with a good reason and a good argument, that's what's going to matter here, right? Not your opinion. Your opinion is valuable, not just to you, but to those with differing opinions from you. We'll see why that's the case when we get to John Stuart Mill. But more importantly, I want to know the argument, the reasons behind your opinion, right? That's what we're going to be focusing on here, right? So let's turn back to this issue about relativism, right? That morality is just simply a matter of opinion, right? It just depends on maybe where you're from or your own sort of taste or something like this, right? That morality is not objective, okay? So what's the typical argument, right? I'm going to give you two of them. The first one is called the cultural differences argument, and the other one is called the provability argument. Right? This is two arguments that are used to support the idea that morality is maybe impossible, right? That's actually that view that morality is impossible is more along the lines of a moral skepticism, right? That we can't really know anything one way or the other about morality, right? This is something that can't really be known. Okay. Now the cultural differences argument seems to support it seems to support cultural relativism quite nicely, right? Now, an argument, right? What is an argument, and what is not an argument, right? Before I move on and talk about these arguments in support of relativism, we need to get clear about what an argument is, because I think this word gets misused quite a bit in the common vernacular, right? When we're talking to people in our day-to-day lives, we might mention something like, I got in an argument with my girlfriend, I got in an argument with my boyfriend, my father and I had an argument. Now, a lot of times these aren't technically arguments by our standards, right? By our academic philosophy standards, right? An argument is going to have to include a few premises, right? You're going to have to give at least one premise, one reason, one fact to support your conclusion, right? To support the statement that you're arguing for. Right. So if I have an argument for relativism, I have to have at least one or two, maybe three, who knows, a number of premises, right? That are statements that I want you to accept as true. Right. And if I want to know whether or not an argument is good or bad, I have to examine this, right? Does the conclusion follow from the premises? And are the premises true, right? Are all these things that the person is trying to state as facts, are they really facts, right? Are they true? In the process of examining the cultural differences argument and the provability argument, we'll be able to demonstrate the differences between a good and a bad argument. The cultural differences argument is not valid, and the provability argument is not sound. Let's go through these arguments, and then I'll explain to you these other concepts of validity and soundness. The cultural differences argument. Premise 1. In culture A, infanticide is morally permissible. Premise 2. In culture B, infanticide is not morally permissible. Conclusion. Therefore, there is no right or wrong concerning the issue of infanticide, right? So basically, we have this claim that in culture 1, right, there are cultures like this, or there have been cultures like this. Inuit cultures up in the Arctic, sometimes they do kill their young, or they did kill their young, right? It was because it was a matter of survival, right? If they didn't kill some of their newborn babies, then there wouldn't be enough food to feed all of these people living in these Arctic climates and these Arctic conditions. And so infanticide was morally permissible, right? We also have a culture like ours and most of the modern world where infanticide is morally reprehensible, right? It's not something that you're supposed to do. And so we take these two cultural differences, right? In one culture, culture A, let's say, infanticide is okay, and in culture B, infanticide is wrong. So does this mean that there is no right or wrong regarding infanticide, right? The killing of infants, right? Is there no right or wrong? It's just a matter of opinion. Well, does the conclusion follow from the premises, right? In other words, is this a valid argument? That's what validity means. To be valid, in order for an argument to be valid, the conclusion actually has to follow, logically follow, from the premises. That is, if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. Well, the premises are true. There are cultures where infanticide is morally permissible, and the second premise is also true, right? It's culture B or any modern culture, infanticide is morally reprehensible. So does this mean that the conclusion has to follow? There is no right or wrong about the matter? No, it's not a valid argument. Why not? Why doesn't the conclusion follow? Well, it seems intuitive. Well, look, you've got two people disagreeing on morals, so it's all wrong. Well, let's step outside the realm of ethics and see if this sort of reasoning applies. This sort of logic, this sort of inference applies to other realms. Take science, scientific questions, for instance. You wouldn't say that. Let's plug in. Let's say something like the Earth is flat and the Earth is round, right? Instead of this issue of infanticide. You wouldn't say that because culture A believes the world is flat and culture B believes the world is round, because of that, you wouldn't say that there is no shape to the world, right? That there are no objective truths about the shape of the world. No, of course not. Why not? Because people's opinions, people's beliefs don't always, unfortunately, they don't always line up to the facts, right? And although people's beliefs sometimes are based on the facts, they might believe something that is not true, right? So just because two cultures disagree about something doesn't mean that there's no possibility of an objective truth pertaining that thing. So maybe infanticide is wrong, or maybe it's not wrong, right? I tend to lean towards the former. But the point is that you're not proving moral skepticism. You're not proving the view that morality and objective morality is impossible by just pointing out to cultural differences, right? So the cultural differences argument is not valid. Okay, so we've talked about the cultural differences argument. Now let's move on to the provability argument, and I will show you how it is not sound, right? So in the course of the cultural differences argument, we were able to show how it's not valid. And when it comes to the provability argument, we'll be looking at soundness, right? So when we're looking at arguments, we want to know two things. Is it valid and is it sound? Those are the two questions that we want to ask. Now, I still haven't explained soundness, but we'll get to that once we get through the provability argument. So what is the provability argument? Well, it's very simple, much like the cultural differences argument, two premises and one conclusion. So the provability argument is as follows. Premise 1, if there are objective moral truths, then we should be able to prove them. Premise 2, we are not able to prove any objective moral truths. Conclusion, there are no objective moral truths. Now, one might ask, is this a valid argument, right? Now we know what validity is, remember? If an argument's valid, it means that the conclusion follows from the premises. So, does the conclusion that there are no objective moral truths, does this follow from the premises? Well, so the premises say if there are objective moral truths, then we should be able to prove them. Second premise, there are no we are not able to prove any objective moral truths. So the conclusion says, therefore, there are no objective moral truths. This is a valid argument, and if you don't understand why, then you might look at my outline. Any argument of this form, if X, then Y, not X, is always valid, right? No matter what you plug in for X or Y, right? If X, then Y, not Y, therefore not X, right? Premise 1 is if X, then Y. Premise 2, not Y. The conclusion, not X. Now, again, no matter what you plug in for X or Y, this is going to be a valid argument. That is, the conclusion will always follow from those given premises, right? If X, then Y, not Y, not X. Think about it this way, right? Let's plug in for X and Y. Let's plug something in very simple. If it is raining outside, then the ground will be wet. So X will be it's raining outside. Y is the ground will be wet. So if it's raining outside, then the ground will be wet. So the second premise is not why. So the ground is not wet, right? Therefore, it is not raining outside, right? So it'll always work, right? And so the provability argument is sound, right? It's a sound argument. If the premises are true, then the conclusion, in fact, does follow. It follows from the premises, okay? But is it sound? Now we're getting to soundness. So what does soundness mean? Finally, you get the answer. So soundness basically means that, one, the argument is valid. That's the first requirement for soundness. You have to have a valid argument. Check, we've got that. And two, all of the premises have to be true. Okay, so we've already looked at the first option. Is it valid? Yes, the provability argument is valid. But is it sound? Well, it's valid, but are all the premises true? And we looked at the first premise, right? The first premise says that if there are objective moral truths, then we should be able to prove them. And I want to say that this premise is false. Why? Why is it false? Why is it false to say that if there are objective moral truths, then we should be able to prove them? Again, let's step outside of the realm of ethics and examine this form of logic and see if it applies to other realms. So let's look to science or mathematics. Probably mathematics will be even more simple, but I'll give an answer for science afterwards. So let's imagine that there is a mathematical problem of which no mathematician has yet solved, right? That there's some sort of geometrical conundrum or some sort of differential equation that is just completely has got them in a whirl, right? Does this mean that there is no solution to this problem? No, it doesn't, right? So just because we haven't been able to prove something doesn't mean that it's not provable, right? So just because there aren't any objective moral truths that have been proven doesn't mean that there aren't any objective moral truths, right? Think about it also in the realm of science. If I'm an astronomer, there are certain truths about the universe which I don't know. Maybe I don't have a good enough telescope yet. Maybe we haven't seen that far into the galaxy. But there are objective truths way out there beyond. But I can't prove them currently. Does that mean that they don't exist? No, it doesn't. So the first premise of the provability argument, right, this claim that we haven't proven objective moral truths, therefore there are no objective moral truths. This first premise I question. I think that's a false premise. So the argument would not be sound. Remember, for an argument to be sound, it has to be valid, and all of the premises have to be true, right? So the first premise is not true, and therefore the argument is not sound. I could go on to the second premise and examine it and see if it is true or false, but all I have to do is find one false premise, and I've proven that the argument is not sound. Okay, but let's go ahead and look at the second premise. We might even question it, right? What does the second premise say? It says that we have not been able, we cannot prove any objective moral truths. Well, if it says this, if that's what it's basically saying, is it true, right? It's easy to think so when we look at more difficult, more controversial issues in morality, like abortion, right? A lot of people are really split on this. A lot of people are very emotional about this, right? So it's hard to sort of tell who is right, who's wrong, who's got the better argument. When does life begin? At conception or later? These are very controversial issues that seem like they're not so easy. They're not so cut and dry. But aren't there other more obvious examples? Imagine at the end of the ethics course, I gave you an exam, and on the exam, there were no questions about the ethics course at all. Instead, I replaced it with very, very complicated mathematical problems, very hard, high-order differential equations that only a graduate and student in mathematics could possibly be able to answer. And everybody in the class fails. Now, is that fair? Does anybody think it would be fair? Well, I'm assuming that most people listening to this would say, no, it's not fair. And rest assured, I will not give you this exam. The final exam will include material from our course. Okay, so I've just shown that there's an objective moral truth, that is unfair, right? Of course, somebody who is a moral relativist might think, oh, this is just phooey. But nevertheless, right, I've shown that the first premise is false. I think it's pretty obviously false. The second one, I think, it's still up in the air, right? But I think I have given a more simple example, right? The example of the unfair exam, where it does seem that there's an objective moral truth, that it does seem pretty obvious that that would not be a fair thing to do, and therefore not an ethical thing to do. So we've gone through the three types of ethics, right? We've gone over normative ethics, practical and applied ethics, and meta ethics. And we'll be doing all sorts of stuff throughout the course, particularly the normative and the meta ethics throughout the course, and even a little bit of practical ethics as you apply some of the readings to your own life and to current events. After this, we talked a little bit about relativism and the different forms of relativism, particularly subjectivism and cultural relativism. And then we went over the arguments in support of moral skepticism, or the view that there are no objective moral truths, right? That's something that the moral relativist sort of has to hold on to. Look, there are no objective moral truths. Morality is just a matter of opinion. And so what were the arguments that we looked at that supported this skeptical outlook when it comes to morality? We looked at the cultural differences argument. We showed that it was not valid. And we looked at the provability argument and showed that it was not sound. We looked at the concept of validity as it pertains to argument. An argument is valid if the conclusion follows from the premises. That is, the conclusion is logically entailed by the premises. If the premises are true, the conclusion must necessarily follow and therefore must be true as well. An argument is sound whenever it is valid and whenever all the premises are true. I don't want to give you the idea that relativism or subjectivism is just a completely false doctrine. All I'm saying, and what I wanted to demonstrate in this first lecture, is that it's not obviously true, which I think a lot of people sort of take it as true. Oh, it's just obvious morality is a matter of opinion. Well, that might be the case, but if it is, better arguments need to be formulated besides this idea that, oh, well, different cultures have different ethics, so therefore there are no ethics objectively, or this idea that, oh, you can't prove them like science proves their statements, so therefore there are no ethics, right? Those aren't good arguments for relativism or subjectivism or any of the offspring thereof. We will be focusing later on in the semester on this question of relativism and subjectivism again, but the earlier philosophers, the classical ethicists, people like Plato and Aristotle, and even later on the Enlightenment era, people like Mill and Kant, we see that they adhere to this idea that there are truths, there are ethical truths, and there are ways of approaching ethical questions objectively. So when you redo your reading, right, the first reading will be from Plato's Meno. I want to see if you can try and spell out the arguments in your mind as you're doing your reading, right? What is the author trying to argue for? Now, this will be a little more difficult in Plato since he writes in the dialogue form, and sometimes it's pretty hard to figure out exactly what the author's intention is, but it might be a little bit more clear in other readings. But the focus would be on what is the author's argument? What are they trying to persuade the reader of, right? What's the conclusion that they're trying to put forth? And what are the premises? What reasons do they give for this conclusion? Once you're able to do that, then you can start asking questions like, is this a valid argument? Does that conclusion actually follow from what's been said? You might ask, is it sound? Are these claims that the author is making to reach their conclusion, are those claims in fact true, right? Is it a sound argument, right? So this is the main thing I really want you to get, if anything, from the course, is to be able to look at the readings and look at these ethical issues in general with a more critical eye and with a good set of reasoning skills.